We're in Genesis chapter 30, but we won't be there for a little while. Just a little word of explanation. What we're going to do here is part 4 of a series we have entitled The Brain-Soul Interface. And many of you have missed several of the first sessions, but we just simply do not have time to review those things. They are on tape, and they're very, very important. But we're not going to go back and review them, though we will have more on it in the second session. But out of the conference came a question or a comment with regard to which came first, the chicken or the egg. And there's discussion back and forth. And of course, one of the reasons that I stand for the chicken coming first will be seen in the conclusion of this study, and you will understand why. And the reason is there is an issue in the angelic conflict with regard to genetics. The whole thing on the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, Abraham's seed, David's seed, involves none other than genetics. The whole thing about the Savior being true humanity in the hypostatic union involves genetics. And if evolution is true in any sense of the word, either before or after, we have to be very careful to mark those spots where it possibly can be true, is true, where there's a potential there, or where it is absolutely not true and the figment of man's imagination. Now, one of the things with regard to evolution, and that is, not all evolution is wrong, and we'll see that in our definition. There is the use of the word evolution that is right. If any of you have ever listened to Rush Limbaugh, and he's loved and hated depending, but if you've ever listened to him, he says we're on the cutting edge of societal evolution. Now, does he mean he believes in evolution? No, he does not. He believes that God created, though I do not believe he is saved. He does believe that God created. What he's talking about is something totally different in one sense, using that word evolution in a secondary sense, than what you normally think of with scientific evolution or the theory of evolution. But the first thing we're going to do is refer you to the fact that the Bible teaches that the earth is very old, but the recreation of life on earth is relatively new or young. We can go back actually 6,000 years. In the year 2020, which is not all that far away, in the year 2020, the earth, as far as its reconstruction, its recreation, will be 6,000 years old. Now, just to refer you to our study on the rapture of the body of Christ, where we trace down what the Bible says chronologically, genealogically, from the point of Adam all the way to the point of Christ. If you go back from 29 AD, 4,000 years is 3971. That's the year that we believe the earth was not created, but recreated, reconstructed. It has perhaps lived and been in existence for billions of years prior to that with the angels. But man was created to resolve the angelic conflict. Man and some of the animals that are on the earth are relatively new creations. So from the point of Adam to the point of Christ, you have simply 4,000 years. Now, why do I point this out? Simply because any evolutionary scientist will say, evolutionary change is very slow. It takes place over hundreds of thousands, or rather millions of years. That's why you have the various ages, geological ages that are taught. Now, 4,000 years as opposed to 1 billion years or 1 million years or 500,000 years is still a relatively short period of time. You and I have not lived that long, that's true, but still it's short in comparison. Now, from the point of Christ onward, 2,000 years, which is where we live, 6,000 years is still not all that long. In our answer to this question, Which came first? The chicken or the egg? All right? So, you have to keep in mind that basically, from the time of Adam to this time, most life forms stayed the same, with few exceptions. Now, there are some exceptions that we will do our best to note in this study. All right, now, from here we go on to the definition of evolution. What is evolution? How is it used in the dictionary? How should we think of evolution? Well, the first thing, when you're talking about an evolution, you're talking about development in something. We could actually use this word in our study here. When it talks about Jesus Christ gave pastor teachers for the maturing of the saints, for the building of the edification complex, Ephesians chapter 4, you're talking about it evolving, literally developing your spiritual repertoire in your human spirit, putting more doctrines in there, more verses in there, a broader understanding in there, so that you have developed more maturely into the likeness of Jesus Christ. You have evolved in that sense. So, using that word in that particular way is not wrong. Do we believe in evolution? Well, the theory that life came from the primordial sludge? No, we do not. However, do we believe that we are evolving right now? Well, absolutely. We're developing, and that's how the word is primarily should be thought of. Secondly, it's any process of formation, development, or growth. And then lastly, and this is the one we're most familiar with, it is a continuous process from unorganized simplicity. You know, here's what they say, and I've quoted it many times. In ages past, the gas exploded. Where the gas came from, they cannot explain. But the gas was pulled together with gravity. The center of it got hot, and all of a sudden, boom, it exploded, and you've got the Big Bang Theory. All right? And by the way, one mentioned the fact that there was a t-shirt, Do I Believe in the Big Bang Theory? And on the back, God said it, and bang, there it was. I espouse to that view. Yes, that's absolutely the way it was. Jesus Christ stepped out on nothing and said, let there be, and bang, there it was. That's how the earth came into existence, with the word of the Lord, and it's sustained by that same word. But they say that it exploded, and then as the earth began to cool, there was water, there were clouds, there was land, and all of a sudden there was a storm, and electricity hit the sludge. And lo and behold, there was a one-celled animal, an amoeba, whatever else you want to call it. And from that amoeba, all of a sudden the amoeba scratched his head and said, hey, I'm lonely. So he decided to split, and there were two, and then more. And then, hey, I want to develop. And then all of a sudden now you have a fish, and onward. We'll talk about that later. But you go from unorganized simplicity to organized complexity. From that one-celled amoeba, you now have man. All right. Now, the next thing we want to discuss, therefore, is the theory of evolution. We simply want to define it. When you're talking about evolution, you're talking about a teaching, basically that comes from atheists or agnostics, though there are such things. We mentioned Billy Graham yesterday was mentioned. Billy Graham is an evolutionist. He is a theistic evolutionist. He believed that God created the one cell and from that comes on. Wrong. Not so. But anyway, we do not espouse to theistic evolution. But it is a teaching that comes from the atheists to the agnostics, from basically the liberal academic community that wants to leave God out of human existence. If God created us, therefore we are responsible back to Him. And in order to get rid of God, which is the philosophy of evil, the epitome of evil says, well, God didn't create us. We were created by natural forces. And the forces of natural selection, the survival of the fittest, the Darwinian theory, has brought us to this state where we are. You are here not because of some divine act. You are here because of selective forces in nature. So, they believe that all living things descended, and you note I put the word ascended, because evolution actually doesn't believe that man started man and went down to the one cell. It actually believes that man started from the one cell and went up to man. It's the ascent of man from one elementary source or form. You have to keep that in mind. That is its basic teaching. Now, illustrations of this. All right? You go from one type of species to another type of species. That is the primary tenet of what we call evolution. So you have the one cell that turns into a fish. How it did it, it doesn't know, but it did it. The fish who says, he peeks his little eyeballs up out of the water of the ocean, he says, boy, that sure is a beautiful island there. Has fruit on the trees and so forth. There's green grass and a nice sand and so forth. I think I'd like to be on that island, So it decides it's going to crawl from the water to the sand. So it crawls up out of the water. And we call those amphibians, So now you have the crocodile. And then the crocodile says, well, here I am, flat on the ground with these stubby little legs, and there's fruit up there that I would like to have. And so therefore, the only way I think that I'm going to get up there is to sprout wings. And lo and behold, that crocodile or alligator or crocogator, whatever it was at the time, decides to sprout wings, and up it goes into the trees. And then it says, well, now, wait one second here. It would be nice to be able to just swing from tree to tree. And so you've got the monkeys swinging from tree to trees, and they said, I'm bored now. I think I'll become a man. I'll swing down from the trees and stand up on my two legs and walk and think, and I'm going to be a man. All right? That's what they believe. It is an evolving from one species to another. All right? Now, there's a second type of evolution, and actually, there is an example of this in the Bible. An evolution within a species, from an inferior one to a superior one within it. So we're going to take just a little bit of time here and look at that in verse number 27 of Genesis 30. Laban, Jacob's uncle, said to him, if I found favor in your eyes, tarry, for I've learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for thy sake. Now, this I like. I'm going to stop here and drill some oil. You talk about blessing by association. Here was carnal Uncle Laban who recognized the fact that God had promised Jacob that he would bless him. And Laban said, hey, this is pretty great. As long as he's in my camp, my coffers are getting full. Will you please stay? And that'd be wonderful, wouldn't it? Some people are a blessing wherever they go, others whenever. Here is a case where, please stay. He said, appoint me thy wages, and I will give it. So thou knowest how I have served thee, and how thy cattle was with me. For it was little which thou hast before I came, and it is now increased to a multitude. The Lord has blessed thee since my coming, and now when I shall provide for mine own house. What shall I provide for mine own house? What shall I give thee? Jacob said, thou shalt not give me anything. I'm gonna still earn it. I've increased your coffers, but I'm going to still earn it. I want to feed and keep your flock. I will pass through all thy flock today, removing from thence all the speckled and spotted cattle, all the brown cattle among the sheep, and the spotted and speckled among the goats. Of such shall be my hire. Now, that's quite an unusual request, isn't it? There are brown sheep and there are white sheep. I want the brown ones. And there's a reason for this. So shall my righteousness answer for me in time to come. When it shall come for my hire before thy face, every one that is speckled, spotted among the goats, brown among the sheep, that shall be counted stolen with me. In other words, that's going to be mine. Laban said, behold, I would that it might be according to thy word. So here's what he did. It's an interesting thing. He knew about genetics. He knew about animal husbandry. So He removed that day the he-goats that were ring-straked, that is, they had streaks of color, and spotted, and all the she-goats that were speckled and spotted, and every one that had some white in it, and all the brown among the sheep, and he gave them to the hand of his sons. And he set 3 days' journey betwixt himself and Jacob. And Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. And Jacob took him rods of green poplar, and hazel and chestnut, and peeled. Now that just simply means he peeled the bark off of it. He allowed the white wood from the inside to be seen on the outside, and made the white appear, and which was in the rods or the branches. He set the rods which he had peeled before the flocks in the gutters and the watering trough when the flocks came to drink, that they should conceive when they came to drink. You know, he had a method to his madness here. He was bringing certain sheep there because the spotted ones, the streaked ones, the ones that were, as it were, pelted with hail, we'll see it in the word grizzled, the grizzled ones, were all going to be his. And so what he was going to do is, as he was taking from Laban's flock, as he would, they would have the sheep there, or whatever animal it was, give birth. Those would be his. All right? So the flocks conceived before the rods, and brought forth ring-straked, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob did separate the lambs, and set the faces of the flocks toward the ring-straked, and all the brown of the flock of Laban. And he put his own flocks by themselves, and put them not unto Laban's cattle. Note this. And it came to pass, whensoever the stronger cattle did conceive, that Jacob laid the rods before the eyes of the cattle in the gutter, that they might conceive among the rods. And when the cattle were feeble, he put them not in. In other words, he was breeding them selectively. He understood the process that there are some with stronger genetics that are going to bring forth more wool, that are going to last longer, more durable, sturdier as far as herd is concerned. And he kept the weaker apart. Now, what happened? The last part of verse 42. So the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. I'm going to answer this question if it seems like Jacob was pilfering amongst the flock of Laban. The man increased exceedingly, had much cattle, and so forth. All right? Chapter 31. And verse number 7. Your father has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times. Now you remember that he was working for Rachel, and Laban deceived him in that case. He had to have Leah first, okay? So then he had to work another 7 years, a total of 14. In that 14 years, Laban changed his wages 10 times. Talk about a minimum wage law. There wasn't one back then. Uncle Laban said it, okay, that's fine with me. And remember, Laban was a Jew, and God says, I'm going to give you knowledge as how to get riches. But he was doing it the wrong way. So God suffered him not to hurt me. If he said thus, the speckled shall be thy wages, then all the cattle bear speckled. And if he thus said, the ring-straked shall be thy wages, then all the cattle bear ring-straked. But God, in other words, now, in this thing, because God gave him this way to genetically alter, bring the best of the flock out of the gene pool, as it were. Note what he says. God has taken away the cattle from your father and given them to me. In other words, those are wages that Uncle Laban owes me. And so, therefore, I did it right under Uncle Laban's nose, keeping his flock good and fed and watered and healthy, but at the same time increasing my riches with the best of the flock. Okay, so within a species, there is a gene pool where you have some that can go from the smaller to the larger, from the slower to the faster, to the more to the unhealthy to the healthy, and so forth. All right, then you have a third. And for the life of me, because yesterday I just got this question, I could not sleep, but I could not come up with a good example of taking one species to the other. So this is the best I could do in such a short time without getting to my resources. But anyway, you know what I'm talking about, where they combine it. Haven't they combined a rabbit and a cat or something like that? I can't remember. But anyway, I did think of one. A horse with a donkey, all right? Horses of a different genre, as they say. A donkey is of a different, yet they're very similar, and they combine them to make a mule. But now here's the interesting thing when you do that. A mule is sterile. A mule cannot reproduce, you see. It cannot make one of its own kind. It has to be through a synthetic or artificial means of bringing one species together with another. Okay. Now, let's just look at some of the various possibilities. And we're going to get right back to the scriptures in just a little bit. But before we do, I want to give you some of the possibilities here. Genetic engineering is what we're talking about. And there are two things. One is most evolution is based on mutation, that of natural selection. We've all heard of Galapagos Island, where Darwin went and he saw all these species and so forth, and there's supposed to be even more now, where species, depending on their climate, say, needed a thicker coat. Well, all of a sudden, the next generation through the gene pool would have a thicker coat. The climate was colder. Those that were in the desert climates would shed their coat and so forth, had very thin skin and the like, through mutation. Now, there are some animals that have been mutated. We cannot deny that fact. There have been some mutations. Now, whether there have been mutations down through the course of billions of years, that is absolutely not true. But those mutations, we believe, are within the gene pool. It is the capability within the pool itself to get a species that is hardier, just like Jacob did. Now, or you can have manipulation. That is, one is natural selection, as is the theory of Darwin. The other is manipulation, where there is genetic engineering. We call it natural again, but it's natural manipulation. He excluded some from the flock that were weaker. He excluded some from the flock that had pure white wool because he wanted the brown, he wanted the spotted, because that was to be his inheritance, his payback from Uncle Laban. So this manipulation here is man-made, even though it was in a natural sense. He did not go outside of the gene pool, go outside of the herd that he had, go outside and bring another type animal into the herd in order to make it stronger and so forth. He did not mingle the seed. But now, today, we have the capability of going into the very blueprint of life itself, in the embryo, to the gene on the chromosome, and making an alteration. Now, this is where it becomes sticky. Up until the 20th century, or the end of the 20th century, you could ask, which came first, the chicken or the egg? And the answer would be simply the chicken. However, you can no longer say that, simply because you might have a different type of chicken. You might have the insertion of another gene into the egg, into the embryo, another gene from another animal, which is what they're doing today with genetic engineering. But this is synthetic. We are creating an alternate life form that God never meant to be. Now, just let me ask you the question. Is this a unique situation? I mean, has man on this planet seen before genetic manipulation forming a third and fourth and other class of being? Absolutely. The Nephilim. When you get to messing around with the genetics and altering them from the original creation, that's when God brings his most severe judgment, and that's where we're heading. However, I would like to pose another possibility with regard to why man today is seems to be different. Now we're going to go from animals to man with the environment, though it applies to animals as well. What do we have today that in some cases to the time of the flood they did not have? Now why do I say to the time of the flood? Because man has not evolved from the time of the flood except in certain areas. You can't get men living 500, 600, 700, 900, close to 1,000 years without some different thing. There were different conditions prior to the flood. In the antediluvian situation, you have the canopy of the clouds. You have just the right temperature on the earth. You have lush vegetation. They didn't have HMOs at that time. They didn't need them, everything was much better until the time of the flood. Then you have men going from 900 years of age to 70 years of age. And as the psalmist said, Moses, in that psalm, if he makes it to 80, it's still going to be difficult. And for those, if you watch NBC News in the morning, sometimes they have people on there 100, 104, and so forth. But sometimes the quality of their life, they made it to that age, the quality of their life is not all that good. Okay, but what causes men in the United States and in developed industrial countries to live longer? You see, some of the statistics are taking the United States of America. What do we have in America? We have vaccines. We have hospitals. We have mech centers. You can, hop in your car and be at a doctor's call here in just a few minutes. That is until you get to the mech center. Then you got to wait on him. Go in there, just scream bloody murder. I'm dying. But you only have a cold. But you'll get waited on. All right. We have better nutrition nowadays for both animals and men. We have better health care. We have, until here of late, people have polarized somewhat to better climates. The emphasis on better communities, being a good person so you don't shoot your neighbor. That's what all the liberal hype is about. But generally, we have it better. And that's why men generally in the United States of America are bigger, stronger, faster than their predecessors. However, we have to look. Generally, around the world, that is not true. There is an average height. There is an average weight. People don't have access to these things. The death rate is higher. The lifespan is shorter, and so forth. But then you come to Africa, where you have the Watusis and the Pygmies. Explain that. Again, it's the genes. So the one is 7 foot tall, the other is 4 foot high or whatever. All right. So that's how we get to where people are with regard to their appearance and the like. However, we turn to Genesis chapter 1. Excuse me. Wish somebody would invent a gene for the cure of the common cold. I'd be the first to test it, but it'd probably come from a monkey, and I'd go around scratching and itching. Would not be good for a pastor to do. Okay. The importance of the word seed. When you see this word in the Bible, there is one word that should flash in your mind immediately: genetics. Because that's what we're talking about. And if it involves animals, plants, or man, or the Nephilim, or the Rephaim, or any of their branches, it comes from seed. All right? Verse number 11. Note two things about it. And it's very, very important. Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, the fruit tree yielding fruit, after its kind, whose seed is in itself. Now, if you could go on down through here, does the very same thing. We're talking about the chicken and the egg. Let's Let's look at verse number 21. God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters bring forth abundantly, after their kind. Every winged fowl, which is where the chicken comes in, after his kind. Skip Yoakum saw the title of this message, this study this morning. Is chicken or the egg? He said, it doesn't matter. He said, I can eat either one. And that's true. Been a lot of poultry that's entered the ministry as well. But every winged fowl after his kind. You see, there is a pattern there, and that is when you have a life form created or recreated, as we have here, it is after its kind. In other words, there can be variations within the species, but there will always be a basic form and pattern. And it has seed in itself. It has the capability of reproducing the image. Now all of that is said to come down to verse number 24. Let the earth bring forth every living creature after his kind, cattle, creeping things, beasts of the earth after his kind. And it was so. God made every beast of the earth after his kind, cattle after their kind, creeping thing after their kind. God saw that it was good, and God said, let us make man in our image. Now what is he saying? I want to have somebody after my kind, a one that can have a relationship with me, and that's spiritually. And so God created man in his image, after his kind. Man lost that image with sin, but still basically it is the image of God in the person of Christ that we restore in regeneration and what we call post-salvation epistemological rehabilitation, or building the edification complex. So you have to understand, this is the important thing. There is seed after its kind. Now, chapter 3, verse 15. This is after the fall. And this is one of the reasons why I contend as graciously as I can and as heartily as I can for watching in what areas we can say that there are differences in men, differences in animal capabilities, and so forth. In verse 15, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed. The way I'm going to genetically construct my champion, and you're going to genetically construct your champion and her seed, God's champion, to bruise your head, and you'll bruise his heel. Now, why? Adam was created in a certain way genetically. Jesus Christ was to come and be a man like Adam. If there is any way of more or less altering the genetic purity of Jesus Christ, he cannot be our Savior. He can't be more than man. He cannot be less than man. And so when we start talking about altering these things, you have to be very careful, because the angels and women in Genesis chapter 6 were the first of many attempts to alter the royal seed so that Jesus Christ would not be who he said. We just studied one with Abraham. Abraham and the works bypass. He bypassed Sarah for Hagar. Why wouldn't Hagar work? Because she was an Egyptian. She had to, the wife of Abraham had to be of his seed, his family. That's why Abraham married his sister. Isaac married his cousin. Jacob married his cousin. Why the tribes were to be intertribal in their marriage with the 12. They were not to go outside of their tribes. At least better not outside of the nation. That's why the Samaritans were looked on as half what? Breeds. Because genetics was important to the nation of Israel. It had to be the genetic lock. And in fact, and I'll close with this. We have a family who comes and goes here that we pray for often, care about, and love them, wish that stay consistently. And they brought another family not too long ago. And many of you do not know, but outside there, he hit me with a question. How come you say that Enoch and Noah were Gentiles? And I said, well, there were no Jews to Abraham. Oh, yes, he said. Anybody created in the image of God is a Jew. I said, oh, wait a minute. That's not true. I said, to be a true Jew, you had to have a genetic link. He never thought about it before. That's because he's either making up his doctrine or listening to somebody who doesn't know straight up from the originals. But it's a genetic link from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and one of the 12. That's why Jesus had to be a son of Abraham, to be the king of the Jews, you say. That's why his genealogies are so important. It's this matter of the seed. And anyway, he turned around, and I didn't say it mean. I don't have a mean bone in my body, and I was not ungracious, but he evidently thought I was a false prophet, teaching weird doctrine. But that's what happened. But what was I standing for? The genetic purity of Jesus Christ. He has to be pure man. He has to be in his body the same as Adam was when he was created, with one exception, the sin nature.